Rain lashed against the tall windows of the Harrington estate, each drop echoing the emptiness inside the grand mansion. The wind howled like a reminder of everything he'd lost, everything he'd buried beneath layers of wealth and indifference. Ethan Harrington stood by the fireplace, the orange glow of the flames flickering against his sharp features, illuminating the loneliness that no amount of money could hide. It had been 5 years since his wife's death. 5 long, silent years of pretending he didn't care, burying himself in boardrooms, contracts, and numbers. He'd become a man defined by control, a man who prided himself on never making mistakes. Until that night, the night he opened the wrong door. It was nearly midnight when it happened. Ethan had returned home from a late meeting, exhausted and half distracted by a pending merger that could make or break his company. He walked through the dimly lit hallway of his mansion, where portraits of ancestors stared down at him, each one a ghostly reminder of the Harrington legacy he was meant to uphold. He stopped outside what he thought was his study. Without thinking, he twisted the knob and stepped inside. But it wasn't his study. It was his maid's room. And what he saw stopped him cold. The room was small, half the size of his walk-in closet, but it was filled with warmth that his entire mansion lacked. On the nightstand sat a flickering candle beside a stack of old textbooks. A tiny vase held a single wilted daisy, and next to it lay a framed photograph of a little girl with big, bright eyes and a gap-toothed smile. On the bed, asleep under a thin blanket, was his maid, Sophia Alvarez. Her hands, calloused from scrubbing and polishing, were curled under her cheek. But what caught his attention wasn't her exhaustion, it was the open sketchbook beside her. Ethan stepped closer, curiosity tugging at him. Inside the sketchbook were stunning pencil drawings, portraits of the house, the gardens, the city skyline, and him. Each sketch was alive with emotion, as if she saw something in the world that he no longer could. But then his gaze fell on one drawing that made his heart clench. It was a picture of a little girl, the same one from the photo on the nightstand, holding hands with a faceless man in a suit. Written at the bottom were the words, "One day, Daddy will come home." Ethan froze. He shouldn't have been there. He shouldn't have seen that. Quietly, he backed out of the room and closed the door behind him. But he couldn't sleep that night. The image of that little girl burned into his mind. The next morning, he called his assistant. "Find out everything you can about Sophia Alvarez." Within hours, the report was on his desk. Sophia Alvarez, age 26, immigrant from Mexico, employed as a maid for the Harrington estate for 6 months. Single mother. Daughter, Isabella, age 5, currently living in a shelter while saving for an apartment. Ethan leaned back in his chair, feeling something twist inside him, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself in years. Guilt. He had barely spoken to her since she started working for him. To him, she was just another employee, someone invisible, someone who kept his house spotless and his life orderly. But now, the thought of her daughter sleeping in a shelter while her mother worked through the night in his mansion, it gnawed at him. That evening, when Sophia came in to serve dinner, Ethan found himself watching her differently. She moved quietly, gracefully, her expression calm but tired. "Sophia," he said suddenly, making her jump. "Yes, Mr. Harrington," she replied, clutching the serving tray. "How long have you been working here?" 6 months, sir. "And your daughter, Isabella, is it?" Her eyes widened slightly. "Why yes, sir. Does she live with you?" There was a pause. "Not right now, sir. She's with a family friend while I save enough for a place of our own." Ethan nodded, pretending to study his wine glass. "You're very talented," he said quietly. She blinked. "Sir. The drawings," he added, looking up. "I saw them." Her face drained of color. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to." "You don't need to apologize," he interrupted gently. "They're beautiful." For a moment, something flickered in her eyes, a mix of pride and embarrassment. "Thank you," she whispered. "It's just something I do to remember home." Ethan didn't reply, but that night, while he lay awake staring at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the image of her quiet dignity, her hidden strength. Over the next few weeks, he began to notice things he'd never cared to before. The way Sophia stayed late without complaint. The way she hummed softly while dusting the piano. The way her hands trembled when she received her paycheck, counting, then recounting it, as if every dollar was a lifeline. He learned she took night classes in art, dreaming of one day illustrating children's books. He learned she skipped meals so she could send money to her daughter's caretaker. He learned, slowly, that kindness didn't need a grand gesture, it lived in quiet persistence. And then came the day that changed everything. It was a Saturday morning when Ethan heard a noise from the kitchen, a crash, followed by a cry of pain. He rushed in to find Sophia on the floor, clutching her wrist. A broken glass lay beside her, milk spilling across the tiles. "Don't move," he said quickly, kneeling beside her. "You're hurt." "It's fine, sir. I'll clean it up." "Stop," he said firmly, his tone soft but commanding. "You need a doctor." Within minutes, he had her in his car, driving to the nearest clinic. She kept protesting, embarrassed, but he ignored her. When the doctor confirmed it was a sprain, Ethan insisted on covering the medical bill. Back at the mansion, as she thanked him quietly, he said something that surprised even himself. "Take a few days off. Full pay." Her eyes widened. "I can't." "You can," he said simply. "And you should." For the first time, she smiled, really smiled, and Ethan felt something warm stir in his chest, something he hadn't felt since his wife died. Days turned into weeks. Ethan found himself looking forward to her return, to the sound of her laughter echoing faintly through the halls. When she came back, he noticed she seemed lighter, happier. One afternoon, while he worked in his study, she knocked softly. "Mr. Harrington, may I ask you something?" "Of course." She hesitated. "Would it be all right if I brought my daughter here for a few hours sometimes? Just so we can spend time together after I finish work." Ethan looked up. The question shouldn't have mattered, but it did. "Yes," he said finally. "Yes, you can." The next weekend, little Isabella came. She was shy at first, hiding behind her mother's skirt, but soon she was giggling as she ran through the garden, chasing butterflies. Ethan found himself watching her from the balcony, an unfamiliar ache filling his chest. It was strange, how easily laughter could fill a house that had been silent for years. As weeks passed, Isabella's visits became regular. She began drawing with Ethan's old sketch pencils, her small hands smudged with graphite. One day, she proudly showed him a picture she'd made, of the three of them standing together in the garden. "You're smiling here," she said, pointing to his face in the drawing. "You don't smile a lot, Mr. Ethan." He laughed softly. "Maybe I should start." But the peace didn't last. One evening, a storm rolled in, dark and violent. Sophia didn't show up for work. Hours passed, and Ethan's worry grew. Then his phone rang. It was the shelter where she sometimes volunteered. "There's been an accident," the woman on the line said. A car skidded near the intersection. Sophia Alvarez was hit. Ethan didn't remember driving to the hospital. He just remembered the sterile smell, the white lights, and the sight of Sophia lying unconscious, her arm bandaged, her face pale. He sat beside her bed, holding her hand, whispering words he never thought he'd say. "You can't leave her, Sophia. Isabella needs you." His voice broke. "I need you too." When she finally woke, her eyes fluttering open, he felt something inside him unclench. She smiled weakly. "You shouldn't be here, Mr. Harrington." "Yes," he said softly. "I should." Weeks later, when she was well enough to return to work, Ethan had made a decision. He met her in the garden one morning, where Isabella was playing with a ball. "Sophia," he began, "I've been thinking about your drawings." She looked confused. "My drawings? I want to help you publish them," he said. "Children's books. The stories you told Isabella, they're beautiful. They deserve to be seen." Tears filled her eyes. "Why would you do that for me?" "Because you reminded me what it means to care," he said quietly. "And because your art gave me something I thought I'd lost, hope." Months later, her first book hit the shelves, Dreams of a Little Girl. It became a bestseller, loved by children across the country. On the dedication page, she wrote, "For the man who opened the wrong door, and found the right heart." Ethan stood beside her at the book launch, watching as Isabella beamed in her mother's arms. He had rebuilt empires, signed million-dollar deals, but this moment felt like the only thing that ever truly mattered. Sometimes, he thought, miracles don't arrive with fanfare. Sometimes, they hide behind small, ordinary doors, waiting for someone to open them by accident. And when he did, he discovered something far greater than wealth. He discovered family.